Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast, episode 122. I'm Steve Smith, and we're going to be speaking with Julian Krinsky. Really excited about talking to Julian. Amazing life, amazing background. I have known Julian since the early 80s. There's just so many things from his upbringing in South Africa, education, Wimbledon. Just have a lot of notes here. I don't really need notes because I've done a lot of things with Julian and his company. But let me give him a call. This is going to be a great podcast. If I can get the phone number, trying it again. And still searching. And a little slow. Julian.
Steve.
Julian Krinsky. Thank you for being a guest on our podcast.
Well, it's an honor. As I've told you for many years, being interviewed by the greatest tennis teacher in the country is an honor. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you with such kind words. There's so many things, but let's get started. Let's go back, South Africa, your childhood. I mean, I know from an academic standpoint, accountant, I like what Bud Collins says, there's two types of tennis players, those who play Wimbledon and those who don't. I've certainly been to South Africa a few times and had so much to do with South Africans, was trained by South Africans, Dennis Van der Meer, Bill Jacobson, and then I trained many South Africans. But tell us about growing up, South Africa, how did you get started in tennis?
Well, by the way, my dad always tells me, you told me, he's passed, that I have to add the law part, accountant and lawyer. So there it is. I started playing tennis when I was about 4 or 5. We had a court. We had a sand court at home. It wasn't as bad as the Rhodesian sand courts, but it was a sand court which eventually became a hard court. And my dad encouraged me. It's ironic because Dennis Van der Meer, one of your mentors, when I went down to meet with him, he said he made an example of me, and he said Julian watched tennis from the age of 3, 4, 5, and in fact, a lot of tennis players have been inspired by watching their parents. So I watched my dad and my mom playing, and started the right way, as you always encourage, with lessons, but very subtle half-hour lessons. Mr. Punchik, I still call him that, his sons became coaches, and he was a Davis Cup player. He's mentioned in a couple of books from Yugoslavia, and he used to come at 6 o'clock in the morning before school, which could have turned me off, but it didn't. And I started playing. And 68, 69 years later, I'm afraid I'm only playing 4 or 5 times a week at this stage, but I did play about 7 times a week when I was growing up.
And that was in Johannesburg?
Yes. 6,000 feet above sea level, which reflects my game. Still trying to get out of a continental grip because there wasn't a lot of time to change grips at 6,000 feet. And obviously started volleying before I learned some patience on the baseline.
And because you played on a sand court, did you find it pretty easy to adapt to clay? I know you played in the French. Yes.
Not really, because the sand court became hard probably when I was 8 or 10.
Okay.
And so really we all grew up on hard courts. And especially in South Africa, in Johannesburg, where the air was so rare, very few players came out of there with great patience. And of course, the French is all about patience.
Yeah, I tell a story about Rod Laver with his brothers. They went from one ant pile to the next with a wheelbarrow, and he actually did have a sand court. They made it out of the sand from the anthills. So
Yeah, no.
not too many South Africans, or I should say not many Australians, South Africans as well, had any connection with playing on a slower court when they're growing up.
Correct. And when I went down to Durban, actually, I had some great results there, which was at sea level. It was such a pleasure. One, there was more air, and two, it was a slower game and gave me more time. So I had an advantage in that respect.
So tell us, we'll talk about playing, and I know you played squash as well.
Yes.
What about education? I think of South Africans with corporal punishment. I think discipline is going away fast. I used to hear South Africans say, "Yeah, I'd get paddled in school, and I'd go home and I'd get paddled for getting paddled."
That's fantastic. Absolutely true. There's no such thing. I mean, I smile sometimes when I hear my own son got 105% on an exam. Don't understand. After 100, I don't know where it goes. And so, no. If we got 80 or 85, we were brilliant. And so it was a nice bar to reach, because it's too easy to get 105% in America, sort of thing. So yes, we had a tremendous discipline. You stood up when the teacher came into the class. You wore a uniform, which was good because it didn't make you stand out amongst everybody else because you had less money or more money. And education was, I call it kind of vicious. It was tough. You fail the whole year. You don't fail a semester. And as you just said, you certainly can't phone your parents for help. And,
I went to a boarding school in New Hampshire. It was coat and tie, all boys. And I know you and I talked about this in years gone by, where you had to sit with the professor and their spouse and actually carry on a conversation. Where I just think about these young tennis players that are homeschooling today, and it's let's go to Chick-fil-A, let's go to Chipotle, and it's so different. And all the changes are not for the best. That's for sure.
Yeah, you've always been a wise person looking from 6,000 feet above, and we've been the same. Although I must say, both Tina, my wife, and I have really enjoyed young people. And if they go astray, I somehow, maybe I'm naive. I blame their parents. I don't blame them. I think they all come out sort of equal, and then somehow they get messed up. And certainly after 12 years old, it used to be 14, their peers are more important than their parents. So I've always told parents, find great friends for your kids, ages 12 to 16, because they will influence your kids more than you will.
No,
that's
so true.
Yeah. And so growing up in...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, accounting, I heard a definition for an accountant. Perfection is a minimum standard. The academic program that you've hired so many people that I train to teach tennis. Many students didn't get the degree because you had to take 2 accounting classes, and one of them was a preliminary course that wasn't really transferable. But talk to us a little bit about your education as far as being an accountant.
Well, Steve, but more accounting, you're right. My dad was an accountant. In fact, he did Dennis Vandermeer's books. He also did Gordon Forbes' books.
Oh, wow.
Books being statements or whatever you call them. But anyhow, and before Dennis came to America, my dad had his certify, his income tax and everything like that. But we lead up to the business programs that we started. But I would always encourage the kids to do some accounting courses. Depends where, what. It's a science. 2 and 2 is 4, always. And if that doesn't work, then there's a problem. And so it's just, as you said, the basic accounting. Whatever you do, if you become a tennis player, a doctor, a lawyer, anything, you need to know basic accounting. So I've always said that. So yes, so I the discipline of that was excellent. You mentioned playing at Wimbledon and the French 69, 70. People don't realize that people coming from South Africa, if you are studying, which I consistently studied, I didn't give up a year to play tennis. Maybe I should have. Still no regrets, and we'll talk about that. If it were in June or May, that's the middle of the school year in South Africa, because the seasons are opposite.
Right.
And so I would leave university or school and go and play 4, 6, or 8 tournaments. Not a great deal of money then, but it was the joy of the game, and come back and catch up my courses. So it wasn't like here where there's a summer off and you can certainly go and play for 2 or 3 months.
To digress for 1 second, Gordon Forbes, our listeners need to go back and read the handful of summers. Just why don't you say a few things, a commercial on Gordon Forbes and the book he wrote.
Indeed. He was a great friend. He passed about 2-3 years ago. In fact, this last July, Tina and I helped Gavin, who was one of my first pros, Gavin, his son, in America in 1978, came to stay at our house, a small house, and he worked for me until Gordon, who was great friends with Mark McCormack, got him a job at IMG, to which he is still there to this day. And when Gordon passed, I said to Gavin, let's honor him somehow. And finally it came this July, where we found a pub and we got hold of all the South Africans and everybody, and we talked Gordon. He was wonderful. And indeed, his first book, he's written 3. So we ended up at Wimbledon this year honoring Gordon. Yeah.
Oh, wow. No, you hooked us up with his son, Gavin. At that time, he was the agent of Stefan Edberg. And
yeah.
one of our students, unfortunately, was in an automobile accident, was left paralyzed. But it was nearby. Tyler was nearby Dallas. And anyway, Gavin Forbes made it all happen, where all these touring pros that were playing the WCT finals came to the hospital. And it was amazing how moving it was, because the young man had been told that he'll never walk again. And, I think Yannick Noah was in that hospital room, and I didn't think he was ever going to leave, because he was just in tears. But yeah.
Wow, Steve, it's such a small tennis world, isn't it? I mean, we say it probably weekly, Tina and I. We bump into somebody and it just circles around. I had no idea that you had followed through with Gavin and that he'd folled through.
It's not what you know too. So you knew him, and we made a phone call. It was back in the 80s, and I really haven't been around high level tennis in some ways, but the connections, it's amazing. Like the other day, the Aussies were playing the Canadians, and Frankie Dansvik's the captain.
In Davis Cup.
Yeah, in Davis Cup.
Yeah.
And Dansvik's the captain, and I did video work for his father. And Shapovalov, you were so close to that program, Tennis Tech, that we had. Richard Hernandez, his mother, Shapovalov, Dennis Tessa, worked in his club for 10 years. And then, of course, obviously Craig Tiley with Tennis Australia. He's been the CEO now for a long time.
Yeah. The first time I met Craig was working with you, for God's sake, in Thailand.
Yeah.
So, you should really have a feather in your hat for that.
Well, like so many South Africans coming back to the discipline, Tiley was such a hard worker, and he deserves everything he's accomplished. But back to education, obviously you carried on, and you have a son who went to Harvard and a son who went to Amherst. And, for the listeners, Amherst is, I just know from one of my sisters, she applied and was accepted 100 years ago, but it was equally, it's very much at the same standard. I think, in the movies you always hear about Harvard. But that discipline of education, certainly from your parents, you carry that on to the next generation through your kids. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we've discussed that the discipline, Simon, the guy at Amherst, who happens to be on the board of Amherst now, he manages all their endowments, highly successful, but built a hard-true tennis court at his summer home in Westchester, New York, and plays, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times a week. He loves the game. He's 48, and they both, Anthony, our oldest, both had the discipline of tennis, and I think it's part of the deal. I played a father-son with Simon on grass about 2 months ago. What a pleasure! And,
that's great.
It's great, and he has a one-handed backhand volley. A two-handed return of serve. Wouldn't we all like that? And a one-handed backhand volley.
Just on our podcast last week, Ty Tucker, coach of Ohio State, said, well, I hate to say I have my players stay back and try to find the freshman's one-handed backhand volley, because I know you and I have talked about the doubles. It's just sad how there's so many lost arts in tennis. I mean, the other day I was at a tournament and I saw 4 boys. They were being coached by a former top 10 player in the world. They were all 4 back at the baseline.
It's yeah. Don't get me started with that too. The last time I saw a doubles match with 2 on the baseline was Leah Piricoli and Silvia Lazzarini winning Wimbledon doubles from the back. And anyhow, it's sad because there's no angle. Or there are angles, but not like from the net. I mean, the closer you are to net, the better your angle. No slice, no drop volleys, no angled overhead. Whatever. So I think you've got to teach the whole game, Steve. Yes, these kids are small and they get past with a lob or anywhere else, but somehow it's very difficult in my time of teaching to change a baseliner's mind. They just don't like the ball going by them 3 or 4 times out of 10, which is a good average with a net player. And it doesn't matter if it goes by you 3 or 4 times, as long as 6 times you win the point, it's fine. And they don't. You bring a baseliner to net and you hit the ball past him, and he won't go there again.
No, I think of Bill Jacobson, the founder of CompuTennis, and he put that together because his son, who was fighting for being number 6 or number 7 at Stanford, which is in a lot of ways is an excellent tennis player, but he said his son wasn't listening to him. It's a myth at every level of the game, as far as going to the net, because you win 2 out of 3, turns into 4 out of 6, 8 out of 12, 16 out of 24. You can actually, if you did that consecutively, you win 6-0, 6-0. But I think that comes back to academics. I always say it makes no sense for everybody to put in their 2 cents. Basically, what we're trying to do is carry the torch from the past, because there's so many people who have gone before us. But I think that's where people need to have a historical perspective for whatever field they're in. I mean, it's said that if you don't know the history of your subject, you don't know your subject.
Steve, it's still fascinating what comes out of your mouth, Mr. Smith. Excellent.
Here's something that when you mentioned accounting and law, I don't have many originals, but this is one, is the best coaches in the world, and you could touch upon this, the best coaches in the world are Jewish moms. They tell their children, you could be a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant, or you will die. And where academics is number 1.
Yeah, well, it's the old joke. How old are your kids? The lawyer's 2 and the doctor's 3. It's it's one of those things. But just culture. You need it to. I told you that I just started John Lloyd's book, and the first page of the book, he writes himself a note, and he says, "Dear John, get yourself an education." So I think Tina has something to say. Hold on a mo.
No.
Gosh, she's you can't do this alone, and I've been very fortunate. We'll talk about gratitude of having Tina at my side, because she really adds the balance, the marketing genius, the logic, because I'm a wild man, it's been just a great 40 years.
No, Tina, for our listeners, Julian's wife, I said every time I go out to dinner with the two of you, I leave and go, I think I need to hire Tina to be my mentor, because I'm still out there in the trenches coaching juniors. And Tina's told me so many times I should just stop and just coach tennis teachers, which I still do that, but it's, I think I would be wise to do that. I've been wise to do several things that she suggested. So she'd be a great
I'm going to
mentor.
make all your pupils jealous. Tina's probably the only person I know who can actually shout at Steve Smith
Yeah, no,
and tell him this is not right, and look, she shouts at me. It's fabulous.
Wow.
I'm not
no, it's good,
complaining.
but you got to thrive on criticism. Go ahead.
I think that yes, but I think you shouldn't ask someone their opinion if you don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, interesting.
No, but I think actually,
anyhow,
yourself being around tennis so much, I think so many times you can see a lot more if you're further away. To be on,
Yeah.
So you were working off the court, but obviously we need to talk about JKST and JKCP, but I think it was as many as 50 people. I mean, at one point, I think it was a pretty safe bet that you had the largest tennis camp, but then they grew into so much more than that. But I know I would go up and do like a 4-day training session, and there had to be 40, 45 tennis teachers for the summer.
Easily. Arvin tells me, my head pro now, and we'll talk about keeping tennis pros around. For good or for bad, I have a lot of old tennis pros who've been with me a long time. But Arvin says we had at some stage, because he was helping control it, 60 teaching teachers, tennis pros, everybody. You've always said, Steve, hang a shingle and you're a tennis pro. But these were good teachers taught by Steve Smith for 4 days to start. And we just, and all our head teachers were Steve Smith prodigies or whatever. And so it was very easy to go. Yes, we had about 300-400 kids a week. And it was wonderful. No regrets. I'm going to say that a lot of times.
Well, one thing about your camp, I mean, we jump all over the place here with this. It's a fascinating life that you've had. But with the camp, one thing that I think was so well done was your tennis teachers, they were done. I mean, they would have the long hours in the sun and help the children out. But then you had an off-court staff where I think so many boarding camps, you're working 24/7. You're the tennis teacher, but then you're also the chaperone in the evening.
Yes, that was my original formula. I spent a lot of hours on the court, and after 35, 40 hours on the court, the last thing I wanted to do was chaperone kids around. I mean, I did it because it was my business. I slept at the college and did what I had to do. But I realized very early that two staffs, now, of course, from a business point of view, you definitely make more money if you use the pros to look after the kids. But especially today with our society, which doesn't mind suing for a drop of a hat, you've got to be so careful. And in fact, I saw that very strongly with our golf pros. That's another story in itself. Maybe because then there's not as much exercise in golf. They really enjoyed their evenings and their weekends, and I certainly would never have a golf pro. I had great golf pros. I'd never have them look after a kid. They'd teach them how to smoke and drink, whatever.
Steve, there's no doubt about it that I would say one of the secrets to our success, or one of the principles to our success, was the separate staff. That, whether it happened organically or whether it was planned, there came a point that we realized this is what's working, and we stuck with it year after year, regardless of what the numbers were.
And regardless of what we were teaching. So it helped us when we started the business camp with Wharton, we got business teachers. And when Tina started a fashion camp, a fashion program and a cooking program, she had 12 chefs working. And they did not look after the kids in the night, weekends or whatever. So, at one stage we had about 4,000 to 5,000 students every summer. And yeah,
I think the benefit to that was that if you treat your staff as professionals, teaching in the daytime, and you have people who really are trained to look after the kids after hours, that was the secret to the staff feeling good about themselves.
You get people to do the things they do best. And a good tennis pro doesn't necessarily make a good young person look after.
Well, let's back up a little bit. One thing on that, though, is that certainly that perhaps, if not doubled your overhead, was actually a greater overhead. But why don't you tell us about, you came over, I think, 77, 78, and tell us Haverford College, starting the camp in Philadelphia, then Penn and Villanova, and on and on. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the beginning of JKST?
Well, yes, they actually started. I had everybody. You know this. You've done it yourself. I had everybody staying at my house, at this little house, and Tina would say, what's the bunk beds in the lounge for? They'll ruin your carpet. And I again called on my accounting and said, if I can make X amount of dollars, I can replace my carpets every summer. So I came over as an accountant, but with a big tennis background. I had quite a few coaches. I didn't mind that the people who came to me for lessons, the young juniors, had one or two coaches. I know you probably think it crossed lines, but as long as they were hitting tennis balls and I could sort of keep an eye on it. So it was the same with me in South Africa. I can't really say one coach did it. Had people, feeding in different things. And so I came over, and for 3 months, actually, they advised me, my friends in America, to work as an accountant. And I found that reasonably boring. South African accountant, a CA, a chartered accountant, is a higher level of accountancy than a CPA here. And so I actually went to do a course to get my CPA, and the fellow there, I thanked him afterwards, said to me, "You're overqualified. Why don't you teach tennis?" And I was already teaching tennis in the nights and the weekends and really enjoying it. And so Halloween 1977, I came home and I announced to my family that I was going to go full-time tennis teaching. It's a bit scary. One, we were extremely poor, and two, I had all these lessons and nights and weekends, nothing during the day. And then slowly it turned around, and I spent my time on court teaching. Realized very soon that if God forbid something happened to me, my leg, my ankle, my whatever, shoulder, my source of income would die. And so I hired one teaching pro and another teaching pro, and took a small amount of money from them, but gave them obviously the larger portion of their lessons. And on my reputation, after I had 35 hours, the next 5 or 10 hours I would give to that pro. I can name some of them. They're still around. Adrian, my partner, was one of the first. And so that's when I started to use the word passive income, which meant that even though I was working 35 hours a week, if the pros were working 35 and I was making $5 from them, I would have $175 a week passive income, and after a while, I had 1, 2, 3, had 6 or 8 pros working, not for me, but with me. I've never said that anybody's worked for me. I actually work for them, the servant leader. And so I then started to take less time on the court and more time off the court. And hence the business evolved. And then I've always said, and I think you may have taught us this, to put your pulse on the pupil who comes on your court. Well, I put my pulse on the kids who were coming for tennis lessons and said, gosh, I'm teaching a lifetime sport. tennis is sport for a lifetime. What else is there in terms of lifetime sports? And I never went necessarily for basketball, although we did incorporate some of that stuff, or team sports. And that's when I went to golf. I don't play myself, but at one stage we had about 25 golf pros who were teaching for us, with us. And then I took it further, and that's where Tina's extra brain came in, and she said, "You're teaching life skills," and that's when everything else came in, from the business to the cooking to the fashion to the medicine to the art, architecture, internships, and went from Haverford to Villanova to Penn to Yale to University of Michigan to everywhere. And that was a lesson in itself, because in retrospect, I think I lost control. I'm not shy to say this. When other people spend your money, it's very tricky. So you got to be careful how you grow a business.
I know at the Wharton School at Penn, you had a course for sports management. I think it was perhaps
excellent.
It was touched by the movie Moneyball or the book Moneyball.
Correct, sports management, and then we saw the movie Moneyball, and I said to Adrian and Steve and Tina, obviously, let's start a Moneyball course. And these things were very popular. Now, it wasn't my name at that stage. We were directing it with our wonderful staff and all that, but the Wharton teachers, the head of Moneyball at Wharton, taught it, and we used to get about 1,000 applicants, and they would take 200. It was excellent. And we became like a service provider, and that's what Tina was saying, because we had these wonderful non-teachers, people who looked after, did all the arrangements, airport runs. At one stage, we had about 30 school buses, and that's where you know me from driving one of them, and about 50 vans that would take the golfers to golf courses every day and pick up kids from the airports and all the rest of it.
No, everyone, our listeners, Julian, a world-class Pied Piper, owning the camp, owner-operator, and you're driving the bus, taking the kids on the field trips. I know my oldest son went to your SAT camp for 3 weeks. And I remember one of your staff members saying, well, we could just send you the materials. I said, no, he needs to go to the camp. And it was excellent for him.
I'm glad to hear. We did make some difference, although, Steve, I wasn't thinking of necessarily making a difference in the kids. But when we closed the camp at the beginning of COVID, March the 14th, 15th, 2020, Tina was amazed. She wants to put a book together. We got about 1,000 notes, be it Facebook or written or emailed or whatever, as to the memories we had created for these kids. It was stunning.
It was really something that stopped us in our tracks. Making the decision was the hardest decision ever. And then all of a sudden, as this incredible bonus, it just blossomed day after day of people calling, writing, emails, and some of the things and the stories they told were just phenomenal. And it wasn't just the students. It was staff that had worked for us. It was some of the university professors that had dealt with us. It was a whole category of different people that we interfaced with that just gave us the greatest goodbye.
Steve, I told Tina this morning, you would know this because you know these guys. There were 2 brothers that came from Colombia, Juan and I think with an M. And they came for about 10 years to teach tennis here, to the point where when I went to recruit in Colombia, they took me around and everything in Bogota. And they had said to me, and again, I'd forgotten, tell me about the big picture, tennis, yes. And I said, guys, you have to read a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's about, I advise everybody to read it because thank God for real estate at this stage of Tina in my life. I'm 73, she's 68, I never said that. we are very fortunate to live on our real estate. And anyhow, so he wrote to me this morning, and he said to me, great memories and all the rest of it, and have a deal in Bogota. Would you be interested in a real estate deal? And I wrote back and I said, how many houses do you own now? And he said, we have 78 low-income houses in Bogota. And thank you for Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and where we're at now. And I talk about a little aside with a coach.
Well, those two brothers, I mean, they're definitely shoe-ins to get into heaven. Juan and Alfie,
Juan, you remember them? Good.
Oh no, I'm in constant communication with them. One of our students, this is another student, decades later, he was in a skateboarding accident, and he's left paralyzed. The two brothers, because they certainly have passive income and they can afford to do it, they have been back and forth to Arkansas. They've been there, I'd say 7 to 9 months, helping the family. I mean, he's a young guy. It was just tragic. He's maybe 6'1", 6'2". He's a big guy anyway, and was a really good player, really good runner, and it's the type of thing where it takes 3 people to have him take a shower. But they're there hoping that it'll be a miracle. They've been part of it every day, helping the family, and
unbelievable.
And all the time that those guys would come and see me, they just love tennis. They want to give back. They had never been at my tennis school or my training when this player was there, but Juan and I got on an airplane right after, shortly after the accident, and Juan organized a few things, and he went back, and his brother went back. I know this summer they were going to be running a tennis camp, but I mean, they've been there day in and day out. They had to go home, just because of their visa. But can you imagine? Yeah. One they can have, because of their situation with their income, they don't have the typical job to go to every day. But
wow,
that's what they're doing with their time. Those guys
circle of life.
Those guys they're shoe-ins for heaven. Those guys are unbelievable. Just amazing,
love it,
amazing
love it.
guys.
What a great, small world though, Steve. How's that circle of tennis?
No, they just have great things to say. They're so dedicated. They spent years and years at your place, a decade anyway.
Yes, they were with me probably 10 years, and it's nice.
Well, go around that. Why don't we touch upon it? You have had such success with long-term employees. What do you attribute that to?
I'd say 2 things. One, I try and treat everybody with dignity. In fact, I just said to you, they don't work for me. I virtually work for them, or they work with me. And I've always allowed them to grow. I think sometimes you can stifle somebody's growth by putting them in a cage, sort of thing. So I've always open to new ideas, new teaching, so I've allowed them. And of course, most importantly, I hope I've paid them well, and that helps. So, and they know I'm not in it for the jackpot. I've told so many students there are no jackpots. Dollar by dollar, ball over the net and in the court by ball over the net and in the court. There's no immediate satisfaction, and so they've stayed with me. I'm thrilled. Of course, it costs so much more each time they stay another year or 5 or 10. But a woman walked into my indoor club, one of my indoor clubs, about 3 months ago, and she said, "I want to thank you for keeping this club open." And I said, and I knew where she was going. I couldn't believe it, though. I mean, this is a lady who played at one of the clubs. She said, "You've given a job to all these people. I know you can rent this club in King of Prussia, which is a big area, as a warehouse or whatever, for more money than you make. And you keep it open for the Arvins and the Timmies and the Makundans and all the people who were Sandy, who worked with me for so many years. And I wanted to give her a kiss because she got it. I mean, she bang on. And and I think the pros understand that. So
I think though
that has helped.
I think the one indoor club, you have the two, and we're upstairs.
Yes.
It's Narberth and Gulf Mills. It's Gulf Mills that's where your staff was, right?
Upstairs.
Yeah, it was so efficient with, and it was amazing. People have to realize that your summer camp was year-round work.
Yes. Oh, 100%. Tina always describes it. How do you describe it, though? Showtime.
Oh, showtime. Yeah. I mean, it's similar to the retailer's Christmas season. I mean, starting Thanksgiving or a little bit before these days, you're just gearing up for showtime. And for us, it was the 8 weeks of summer. We worked all year round for that.
To put it money-wise or whatever, we closed the camp March, say the 15th, gave everybody 3 weeks notice and just said the universities are not going to open, the kids are not going to come from overseas, the counselors are not going to come from overseas or even from America, and it's just not going to happen, which was kind of prophetic. It's just starting to happen back now, but there's still some universities that are holding out. So I said, I'm sorry about this, because we had a machine running upstairs, as you say. And at that stage, March 15th, I had spent, with refunds and all the rest of it, $1.5 million. And that was marketing and getting ready for the June surge. And I paid off my debt, and I paid off all the deposits and all the rest of it. And that was it, So, but it shows you how much work we had done from September to March.
Yeah, with the boarding camp, day camp. I mean, it was a combination of both.
Yes, I've had a lot of discussions with Charlie Hovelaar, who was Nike camps, and he just sold it, a good friend. And, if there's anything to learn, this is what he's taught me. Charlie had all the universities. Do you know him, Steve?
Not well. I certainly communicated with him, and he hired people I've trained. They were interested in this course I have, Tennis Intelligence Applied, years ago. But I think you've said it before, is that many times a tennis camp is, and I really appreciate how you brought education to your camp, but I think most times camps are more an experience than they are an education. But it's very, very important to have both. I mean, one thing you touched on earlier with how many lives you touched and those 1,000 messages from this person and that person. I tell people all the time, it's many, many years ago, over half a century, that I went to hockey school in Toronto every summer.
Yeah.
And I just remember it like it was yesterday. I mean, it's very, very powerful that the people that are teaching kids in summer camp, they need to realize how important that is, and it's an experience that kids won't forget the rest of their life.
And a chance to add to their lives, not only just tennis, but, you said manners and opening their eyes to a lot of things. Absolutely. Go ahead, Tim.
No, I mean, there are so many different business models out there, and that was what you have to do. You have to decide. You can't be a little of this and a little of that. You have to figure out, what is it that you want to accomplish and stick to your model.
Well, Charlie said to me, getting back, that the last 2 years when he couldn't open his residential part, he really pushed his day part. And he said his numbers were just as good as when he had the residential, which stunned me. But then he was charging $800 a week or $900 a week for day camp, and selling, the university itself, like Stanford or whatever. And so it was stunning to hear that. I've always thought, and we had many day camps. We had an all sports day camp and arts and for younger kids. I always thought you needed big numbers, and in fact you did. You needed 300 kids a week at day camp and 100 kids a week at residential, at overnight, and that would be equivalent. So the marketing part was in a way harder. But if you've got people that you're teaching, pros, and they have a very successful day camp, sometimes I'd be jealous of them, because when we closed, not jealous, envious, don't like that word, when we closed our camp, Tina and I looked at each other on July 4th and said, wow, we don't have 200 kids in New York, 200 in Washington, 200 at Hershey Park. We have no responsibility. And we sat there and we said, this is terrific, because when Tina says showtime, that was 8 weeks. It was 56 days and nights. There's no respite, especially when the kids are coming from overseas. So July 4th or any of these days are not that special for them. It's just a regular day,
But we had the challenge of, on July 4th, making sure that they not only had a great day all day long, regardless of where they were, but they had to see the fireworks. And would it rain? And would the fireworks happen? Or would it be too hot at the fireworks? So there were all kinds of challenges that gave us a lot of gray hair.
See, we're talking like old people. It's disgusting.
That's
and sometimes I don't like to. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say
No.
that.
I just.
Your turn. Go ahead, Julian.
Well, no. We think forward, not backward. Tina and I are trying desperately at our age to remain interesting and interested. And that brings me back to what I used to say to the kids. You've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and if you don't ask questions and listen, you'll never grow. I mean, yeah.
And when people ask for advice today, we try to share with them the thoughts that we carried to work each day, which was listen to the kids, listen to what they want, find out where their interests are, and how can you deliver that to them in a way that coordinates and aligns with your principles. How do you bring their interests, or how do you fulfill their interests in the best way you can? And listening to them really helped us to grow some of the programs that we did. When we saw the kids just absolutely going crazy over cooking and the Food Network was starting, we thought, that's it. We're going to add some of that into those that don't want to play tennis all day long or don't want to do other things. And now there's
life skills.
Life skills.
Yeah, there's so many stories. I was at your place training the coaches, and you had a young man from Puerto Rico, and he was there because you'd met him and found out his background with the guitar. And, so all the kids were around the coaches, and he was asked, how did you get so good, about lessons or whatever. And I just remember he said, I just loved it so much I would practice till my fingers would bleed.
Passion.
Yeah.
Passion. How many times?
Yeah, so I remember you'd brought him in, and that was more powerful than anything I had shared with those people about forehands and backhands.
Well, listen, we've all bled on the court in some way or another, and if there's, no bleeding, there's no result. So,
There's just so many stories. I mean, I think the other thing that, going back, sorry to circle back to the cooking, but I guess it was on my mind, is that we would run into people years later and they said, when we got to college, we were able to fend for ourselves eating healthy snacks. We understood what, a label was on the back of a food product, and we were able to decipher whether it was good for us or not good for us. And we understood about, just what's healthy and not healthy. And I don't know that we thought it through that well, but these were some of the gifts that just kept on giving.
Well, that's part of the program that Tina ran with Canyon Ranch Health Resort for 10 years. And they would take them to the supermarket and make them read these labels and talk about them. So there was, it's nice. All good stuff.
All life skills.
Here's a story. Julian, test your memory. I don't think of you as somebody who's getting nervous or be lost for words, but you were in a toy store in Manhattan, during the U.S. Open, and you met your hero and you choked. Can you tell us that story?
Oh, well, you know the story. We were in FAO shorts, and I said to Julian, "Oh, well, look who's in that aisle there." And he said,
"There's Mirka."
Yeah, and he said, "Well, look who's over there. There's Roger."
And off I run. But I always told the kids, prepare to meet your hero. I made such a mess, Steve. To this day, I can laugh at it. I'm fairly secure, but I think if I think back at it, I went up to him and I said, "Roger, I'm from South Africa, just like your mother." And he's such a lovely guy.
He went, "Yeah, I can hear."
He said, "I can hear." And then I said, "Yeah, I can't believe this, Stephen. I can't believe I'm even telling the story." And to have told it many times, I said, "I played at Wimbledon just like you." And I mean, really, I hadn't won it 15 times or whatever. And so he said, "Oh, that's very nice." I mean, he could have said a lot of other things. I said, "It gets worse. It's on its way down." I said, "I have a one-handed backhand just like you." I couldn't believe what was coming out of my mouth.
So funny.
And he said, "Yeah." I said, "But I played with a wooden racket." I mean, really, today, if I were to bump into Roger, I would truly, hopefully, have better questions or remarks. So I always told the kids, you've got a hero. Everybody's got somebody that they look up to. Just prepare before what you want to say to them.
That reminds me of a story. My father was at the Masters. He loved golf. And it was Jack Nicklaus. Jack Nicklaus came up to him and asked him how so-and-so did on the last hole. And my father, deer in headlights, he just froze. And then somebody else just quickly answered the question. And my mother years later said, "You blew it. You had a chance to talk to Jack Nicklaus. You blew it."
Yeah, I blew it. So it's okay. But that's funny. You should remind me on that one. Yeah.
I remember you telling that story. A few times I remember being at Indian Wells and I was in this lounge area in the locker room, and it was, Federer walked in, and it was just the two of us, or turned around at Miami, and we're in line. I know certainly like you. I mean, a lot of people who personally know him and know him well, but I just say, "Hey, how's it going?" All the time I worked with Braden, I was around a lot of famous people, and Vic used to say, you want to treat those that are not famous like they are, and those that are famous like they're not. And
lovely.
But I remember too being influenced where when I was really young, that not to ask for autographs. I think when kids are really, really young, but if kids get to be 14, 15 years old, I think it's a little bit of the off factor. But no, I think with Roger Federer, when he walks into a room, I was many times I was writing for a magazine, and it was mostly at the U.S. Open, but I never really asked questions. The questions are all about the match. And I would have liked to ask questions about his background when he was a little kid and such, about tennis instruction. But it was when he doesn't speak German as well as he speaks Swiss German, French, and English. But he wins those late night matches on Ash, and his dad would always come, and the way he just spoke. I mean, when he started to speak German, you could see he was set up, and he was just such a classy guy, though. Amazing.
Steve, how's it going? Really, that's so American. Bless your heart. How's it going? By the way, another great speaker that Tina and I have been privileged to have lunch with and go to all his charity events is Andre Agassi. We always thought he had a speech right. I mean, the speech that it's definitely worth it if you've never seen the speech he made for Steffi at the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, amazing.
It goes down in our books as one of the great speeches. And Tina's clutching her heart. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
No,
so,
you certainly can YouTube that. Vince Spadea, I mean, he was a great player long before we had him. But Dave Anderson and I spent time working with Vince Spadea when he won the Orange Bowl. And he won his first pro tournament at 29. And shortly before that, Spadea's parents were telling me that Andre told him that he was 29 years old before he really even knew what was going on. And if people look at his career, he did so much he did so well in the second half or the later stages of his career.
Right.
But
In his book.
I do think the players. I mean, when you win like that, you have a microphone. Like even like a Jimmy Connors. There's so many of them. I think they're pretty good speakers because I mean the depth of what he has to say. The heart, the soul. The people that win a lot, they have a microphone. They're pretty good.
Steve, there's two questions I want to ask you. One, you've spoken about. If I were to say my favorite tennis books, yes, Handful of Summer still lives well with me. Agassi's book was fantastic. Connors' book was better than I thought it would be, and I told him. He came for an exhibition, and I said to him, your book was really good. I said, of course I said the wrong thing. I always do. I said Agassi's was better, which was the wrong thing to say to Connors. Of the other books of players, what are your favorite books?
I was just sent 125 books from Vic Braden's library. I know you helped me when we were trying to save the archive, and now that the Tennis Channel has that.
Yeah,
I'm always telling you.
David Egg just told me.
Go ahead.
David Egg just told me that they have the archives because I was wondering when.
But Tennis Channel didn't want the books, and there's about another 125 that I'm grateful that are going to be sent to me. But Melody just wanted to spend more time, Vic's widow, reading the messages. It was pretty much everybody wrote a book, gave Vic a copy of the book. I'm always telling kids, and I think today sometimes a kid doesn't even know what a library card is. You don't have to buy the book; you can go to the public library.
No.
But to read autobiographies, I think the backstory. I think really to find out. I'm more fascinated by the character than I am technique. People come to see me for technique and tactics and just core information, but it's the story behind the story. I mean, people become great.
Love it.
It's not really. It's not really about the tennis. Actually, it's quite easy. I guess for us, because we have a captive audience, people are sent to us. They get off an airplane, they check in a hotel, and they come here to be filmed, and they know what they're in for. They know they're coming here to make changes. But it's just character 101, and you find out, the story behind the story. Like say, I could ask you as a South African, tell us a little bit about the Afrikaner. I mean, I really believe that one of the reasons that Federer is so good is he's afraid of his mother, in a good way. As a kid, where where he bleached his hair blonde and he had his baseball hat pulled way down because after he won the Orange Bowl, and his mother said, "You're just drawing too much attention to yourself." And he had his baseball hat pulled down over his eyes and his ears. And his friend said, "Why are you wearing your hat that way?" Because I don't want to remind my mother. She'll just get mad.
I haven't heard that story. Great.
But my oldest brother was a general manager of 3 NHL hockey teams, and he used to say that he wanted to draft players that were afraid of their mother. And one of the greatest days for me in tennis is I was working with Robbie Seguzo and Carleen Bassett. They had a tennis academy that Chris Severin now owns. And I remember seeing Dennis Vandermeer. We were at the Orange Bowl, and he said, "Steven, it's not going to work." And I said, "Why is that, Dennis?" He goes, "You're working for them, and they should be working for you." And they were both young people coming off the tour, so I set them up to go to Fort Lauderdale and make these presentations, and it was at the Fort Lauderdale War Memorial. And so every other hour you would speak for 10 minutes. So they didn't, Robbie didn't go, and then Carleen didn't go. They were in their late 20s. So I'm the tennis director, so I go, and I get to sit next to Jean Beliveau, who's like one of the greatest hockey players of all time, like a childhood idol. So I'm just so we just chat back and forth, and he'd have to go do his 10 minutes, and then I'd have to go do my 10 minutes, and I asked him, I said, "Hey, back in the 70s, everybody wore long hair but you." And it was a classic answer. I said, "Why didn't you wear long hair?" He goes, "I was afraid of my mother." And,
interesting. That kind of makes some sense.
No, if you look at the successful boys in tennis, that grow into men, obviously young men, it's the relationship generally they have with their mother, and it's the flip side for the girls. A lot of times the father-son will have a conflict, like the mother-daughter will have a conflict, and like the mother will tell the daughter, "Why don't I want you to wear that?" And the dad's not really even in tune with something like that.
It's very interesting. We saw it in action now. Tina and I were in the southwest of Greece, and Muratoglu, whatever he calls himself, has an academy there. and he had two tennis pros. They were brothers, excellent. They'd beaten
Tsitsipas.
Tsitsipas
Yeah,
when he
in
was
the
young.
14.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they said he was small, and they would just hit the ball over his head and all the rest because he'd come to net all the time. And I didn't ask them how old they were. When people say I've beaten somebody, he was 10 and I was 14, sort of thing. But anyhow, they were wonderful, great teachers. Had one good tip for Tina. By the way, Tina's playing 5 times a week here. You're part of this monster that sits next to me here. Anyhow, the one guy said on the volley, it's like cleaning the stuff off the table, just wiping it off, meaning a nice long stroke as compared to a jab, and certainly on a soft volley, hitting it. But anyhow, so I offered both of them a job. They both, funny enough, had visas for America, and offered them a job. They went home, they came back.
They were thrilled at the offer, and they came back and they said, our mother just doesn't want us to leave. And I said,
These
well,
are 28-year-olds.
yeah. So you know what? I think you have a book in that, Steve. I like your idea.
Well, coming back to Agassi, I tell people they should read Mike Agassi's book. It came out first.
I didn't read it. That's interesting. Yeah.
With,
That would be interesting. I'll pick it up. His book itself was amazing. Just, the different stages of his life and the character as it came through. That he hated tennis.
I think all world-class players, and they have an autobiography, really should be a must-read, just to find out, how did they go from point A to point B.
Yeah, so getting back, you think Agassi's father, but who else have you read that made an impression on you? I mean, educate Tina and I.
Oh, I just think, you think of someone like Marty Reason.
Shame, he just died. Poor fella, yes.
Yeah, I mean, he played basketball. Northwestern, Tony Trabert, we're talking about him a couple weeks ago with Brian Clark from Cincinnati. You find out generally that they played other sports and they learned to be a teammate.
Yes.
I think also too, the autobiographies, I like commencement speeches. I love Hall of Fame speeches from every sport, like John Stockton. John Stockton, a basketball player. And it's just amazing with birth order. And many times it's the older sibling that went first. And, they set the path. They went first, and a lot of times the family made so many mistakes, and it's not always the first child. Like Agassi is the youngest of 4. His sister Tammy went to Tyler Junior College, and then she went.
Didn't know that.
Then she went to Texas A&M after that, and she didn't have very good technique. Andre's technique, the dad. This is in the first book. He was a bellman in Chicago before he went to Vegas, and he, as a boxer, his story to get out of Iran
or somewhere.
With, he buys a house, and the realtor is walking up the front sidewalk, and Mike goes around. His dad goes around side. Here's a man on a mission, and the realtor says, "Mike, no, let's go in the house first." He never saw the inside of the house. And then you have to really, pat your back on, I think it's Jean Agassi, the mom, where, can you imagine buying a house and not seeing the inside of it? But he went in the backyard, he marked it off. So he's the one who had a ball machine. The dad sent 20.
The monster.
Yeah, 2,500 balls.
What did he call it?
I'm not sure, but they souped it up in 2,500 balls a day. But, like Rita, the oldest, the daughter, she was married to Pancho Gonzalez. She was taking lessons from Gonzalez when she was 17, and next thing you know, a couple years later, they're husband, wife, and amazing stories. But for me, right now, I just, from this Braden collection, just getting around to reading a book on Nastasi. With Tiriac, for example, Tiriac say, okay, do this till I come back. I want you to hit a slice serve as a righty wide in the deuce court. And Tiriac would go run errands, and when he'd come back, no matter whether it was 30 minutes or 3 hours and 30 minutes, Nastasi would be there hitting slice serves. And
Interesting.
you don't think of someone like Nastasi having that type of
No, never thought so.
stick-to-itiveness, but yeah, no, the story behind the stories. There's soft love, tough love, and crazy love, and crazy love doesn't have to be crazy, but you think, well, the parents, they sacrifice so much for their kids to get from point A to point B, and it's not, certainly tennis, I think it's even more difficult, especially if someone plays pro tennis. If you're playing minor league pro hockey, the sport I grew up in, the team is paying for the bus, the team is paying for the hotel, the team is paying for the meals. But if you're trying to make it in tennis, you're just making it on your own. The burden's really on the family.
Yeah.
Tell us a little about the Afrikaners. You're English-speaking South African, correct? Were you ever part of any Afrikaner schools?
No. Funny enough, I did have a scholarship to Stellenbosch. There was a coach called Jaroslav Huber. I think his kids are still around, and he really made Andrew Patterson, if you remember, tennis player from Rhodesia. And he offered me a scholarship, but it was in Afrikaans. And in fact, Johan Krinsky, a great friend, and I, we still speak about it. He thinks I'm fluent in Afrikaans. No, I can't speak it. But he rattles off, and I sort of pick up every second or third word. But it didn't have so much to do with the Afrikaans. The breakdown of South Africa at the time, certainly when we left, there were about 60 million people, of which 52, 53 million were, I don't know what you'd say, African Americans. No, they weren't African. They weren't American. They were African. And there were about 5 or 6 million white people, 52 million black people, and then the rest was, Portuguese or Greek or South African Jews. There was only about 125 South African Jewish people. And so that was the situation. So, no, we didn't, as such, there were a couple of tournaments in Pretoria, which was Afrikaans speaking. I'd meet and I'd play against Afrikaans speaking players who were tough, by the way, very tough. Well, that's the rugby background. And that's it. That was our mix.
Well, the Afrikaner, for our listeners, I mean, those are the Dutch settlers who were basically rural settlers, and the English were more urban, correct?
Correct. They're the ones who came from the Dutch East India Company, came up, and it's gone back. I was speaking to Johan the other day about the fact that a whole bunch of Afrikaans people formed a little city just outside Cape Town in the Cape. And it's all Afrikaans speaking and very safe, because South Africa is not that safe at the moment, as you well know. And so it's thriving. It's a city within a country.
Well, apartheid obviously was wrong, but I was
100%.
in such a complex society with all the different nationalities, languages, religions. But I was driving across this country, and a young South African by the name of Malcolm Thorne, and I said, let me show you something. And we drove into an Indian reservation. There's an expression, you can never totally trust government, just ask a Native American. But I think that's where you have to learn from the past to deal with the present and work towards the future. I think, I don't want to get into politics, but this counterculture that taking statues down is that it is what it is, and there's just, in every walk of life, there's been so many mistakes made. But I think to go forward, you can't change history.
You got to. You said it. You actually said it earlier on. You said, if history of tennis, history of whatever, you need that, because those were the mistakes they were making. By the way, I looked up Oranje is an Afrikaans separatist town founded by Afrikaners in South Africa. It's located along the Orange River in the Karoo region. It's called Oranje, Orania. Very interesting, No, but history, that's a whole different story. Tina and I feel exactly the same as you do.
Well, tell us about
it's important.
Talking about autobiographies, tell us a little bit about some of the players that are your age, from your era. I saw where you played Alan Fox. I know he wrote the book, if I'm the better player,
if I'm such a good player.
if you're not, if you're the better player, why don't? If I'm the better player, why don't I win? I think that was it.
Yeah, no, it's just called "If I'm such a good player, why can't I win?" We're still great friends. He's older than me. How old is Alan? 81, 82. I'm 73. Played him in the Maccabiah Games in the semi-finals. Beat me 4-3. We remain good friends. And he's an interesting character. Yeah, but he's older. Drysdale, we're still friends with. We'll see him in Austin next month. Ray Moore, older, used to play at my house. So the people, Byron Bertram's younger, Creek's younger. I don't know, when I played, well, Laver won Wimbledon that year. So I'm thinking who was playing. I don't know if we had such great South African players, Bernie Mitten, maybe, at the time.
Yeah,
you know, we've had waves of players. Yeah,
I remember doing a project with Vic Braden, such a positive guy, and Tim Gullickson was making these changes, and he's playing with me, and Vic was excited. I said, Vic, I think that we need to have somebody else play him. I don't think I'm strong enough, and we got Bernie Mitten to come out from Newport Beach. But going back to Alan Fox, I used to write on the board when I was training tennis teachers, 3 things, not in any order, but 1 was PhD, 2 was Wimbledon or top 10 player in the world, and 3 is be competent. And you know, I never knew Alan Fox. I read his book, and he did hire some people that I trained for his summer camp. But
good for him.
But that's, I said that's what you're up against. You're people that are highly educated, go as far as having a PhD and sports science or what have you, and then people have been to the mountaintop. They've played high level world class tennis. But that's where I used to tell the tennis teachers I was working with, you have to be competent. You're not going to make it. You won't. You're not on a pathway right now to have these other 2 credentials. I mean, certainly one you go to school forever and get a PhD, but you can't really go back and say, well, I'll be top 10 in the world. Yes.
Oh, you've described him very well. Highly competitive, by the way. We invited him to talk to our tennis kids one year. It's actually in the winter, and he had just broken his wrist. He's a crazy man. He was flying an aeroplane, had an accident, and he said, "Let's go for a game." And he had his left hand in a cast, so he threw up the ball with his fist, sort of thing, because it was all thing. Anyhow, we played, and he wanted to play some singles, and I was up 6-love, 5-love, and I hit a shot, and he hit a shot, and I called it out, and he came across the net, and he said, "You're cheating me. That was in." And I said, "Alan, are you kidding? I'm up 6-love, 5-love. Why would I want?" But it just shows you how competitive he was, and I kind of remind him of the story. So. Good old Alan, it's very difficult to teach somebody.
Bjorn Borg, he was playing Tom Ocker, Brookline, Massachusetts on the clay. They used to have the finals on Monday night, and he was beating the Dutchman 6-1, 6-0. And he's up 5-love, and he got a bad call, what he thought was a bad call. And I tell people I've met so many top players, but I think of a guy by the name of Wayne Sabin, Welby Van Horn, and Carleen Bassett. Top 10 people. I mean, so competitive. Yeah. Well, wasn't Andy Murray at your place? Did you guys spend time around Andy Murray recently?
He did. He came for 6 weeks. He was. By the way, that's an excellent movie. If you want, did you see it?
Yeah, I saw
it.
Called the documentary.
Resurfaced. Yeah, it shows you how hard he worked. It was sad because he came with his coach, whatever his name is, a British guy, and lovely guy.
Leon Smith.
And no, another one. His brother owns a tennis club in London, and in fact, he's coaching Shapovalov now, or somebody. And anyhow, I came, and it was just after he had his first hip sort of resurfaced. It wasn't redone. And I said to all the people around, he's not moving. He's missing. And lo and behold, he tried, he went home, and then he had the real thing done. He had the thing, I don't know, replaced or whatever. But I could see that. Nice guy. You see him scowling on the court. He's a really nice guy. Not a great personality, but a nice guy.
I was just recently sent something. I'm fortunate that coaches send me sayings and video clips on a daily basis, and it was a list. He was last on the list. It said how many days it took someone once they became in the top. They made the top 10 in the world, and then how many days it took them to become number one. And it was, I think, 3,800 plus days. And then his comment for once Murray was top 10 in the world. Of course, he was top 10 when Federer and Nadal. And then Djokovic came on the scene. So it took him a long time to eventually become one. I think it was 3,800 plus days. And then, he saw a copy of it and he said that's what you call persistency. That he just kept humming.
Yeah, he's still at it. He's still, and it's amazing. Absolutely amazing. So, he spent time. I've spent time with a lot of these players. Why isn't Shapovalov better than he is? Why isn't Dimitrov better than he is? They're both such good ball strikers. I mean, Shapovalov's very exciting to watch, but he can't seem, I don't know, you tell me?
Well, I think on a podcast, we've talked about doing, a lot of people said, well, if you're going to do it, we should have film. Denis Shapovalov, he was Russian, he was in Israel, but he went to Toronto with his mother. He's 3 years old, and Richard Hernandez gave her a job, and she couldn't even speak English. I remember being on, I will do Zoom calls or conference calls with teaching staffs, and Richard could not convince her that you didn't volley with an open racket face. And when he comes in, Jimmy Arias said about Dennis, I love how he comes to the net. And I like how Aries is so honest. A lot of the commentators, I think they're edifying the players too many times because they're looking for a job. And
sure.
I'm a little cynical that
Even
way.
the coaches.
So when he comes in all the time, but he doesn't know what to do when he gets there. It's great. They just won the Davis Cup.
Davis Cup.
And he has so many big wins. But I think on a pie graph, Dennis, I think that he should still be connected with his first days in tennis. 10 years. If someone wanted to look at him going forward at age 8, they just have to go to YouTube and put Denis Shapovalov, is that how you say it?
Yes.
At age 8, and he was going forward. But Richard Hernandez tells a story. I coached a young boy. He won the Orange Bowl, La Petite, and he was struggling with his attitude. And we called up Richard Hernandez and Miran Man and said, tell us about Dennis. And he was just so coachable. I coached another boy, another Canadian, Dylan Bernardchek, who he's a year older, but he used to, he just had Dennis's number, breadsticks and bagels, 6'1", 6'0". And I asked him years later, he called me up, he was trying to switch from one school to the next. I said, you and Dennis, what happened? And he said, I quit listening to people, and he always listened. But the stories about how hard he worked, I think, Dimitrov, the Bulgarian, the Ferrari, he had 7 different coaches the first 7 years. And
interesting.
I think of Roger Federer, one of our longtime associates, has been coaching Mackenzie McDonald for a long time, and Mackenzie McDonald sent Federer an email saying how do I need to get better? And so it's privileged information, but I have a copy of it on my phone. And same thing Dick Gould says at Stanford. I don't care how you get there, but get to the net twice a game. And I think with Dimitrov, I think the Russian formula for Daniel Cole's book, The Talent Code, you need powerful, consistent coaching. I tell people, I can't really do that perhaps on a podcast, but how you talk about working with pro tennis and how it didn't work for you, and you just stand there with your arms crossed, you hug your racket, and you go, well, I tried coaching pro tennis. And then you kind of turn to the left, turn to the right like you're watching a tennis ball go back and forth. Why don't you talk about that for a second?
Well, you're always worried that they're going to fire you. So that who are you working for? It's are they working for you or you for them? That's very tricky. I mean, how many people do you know? Perhaps Ed Berg and what was his coach for about 15, 20 years, Nadal. There's just very few who have their original coaches.
Yeah, Mikhail Uzny would be one. Uzny. There's not many.
Uh-huh.
There's not many. Ed Berg was with his coach for a long time.
What was the name? English name?
Yeah, an Englishman. Tony Picard?
Picard, yeah.
Tony Picard.
That's it.
Here's somebody you could talk about for a second from your neighborhood that you knew her from the time she was a young girl. Now, Lisa Raymond. I know the University of Florida, they several years back, they won some national titles on the women's side. And I know now they've recently won on the men's side. And I'm saying if I was a coach at the University of Florida on the women's side, I would sit all the women down and say, okay, we're going to watch how Lisa Raymond play doubles. And, Rantalova calls it real doubles.
100%.
The easiest money, and we get in trouble. I know you and I would start talking about women's doubles. Easiest money in pro tennis. I mean, you go to the NCAAs, you see these girls that are so athletic, and they're playing doubles like they're 3-5 ladies. They're playing one up, one back. But tell us about Lisa Raymond. I mean, she's up to be in the Hall of Fame. I hope she gets in.
Well, my story about her is her mom brought her to me when she was about 6 or 7, 8, and I remember the mom chain smoking at Gulf Mills. Those were the days, and she said, "I've bought tickets for Wimbledon for 10 years' time or something." Today she was 8 for when she's 18, and I was, with all due respect, immediately turned off. It was one of those parents who, nah, this is not happening. And then Lisa did not want to play the game at the beginning. Her mom just decided that she was going to groom her. And obviously, I mean, she has such talent and such great hands that maybe at 10 or 12, Charlie Oliver took her at Philadelphia Cricket Club, and he really didn't get the full due for that, and made her to what she was or is, or whatever. But at the beginning, she didn't, and all of a sudden, she started to win a few matches with her talent. She wasn't the biggest girl, but she had such great talent, as you were explaining. And once they start to win a few matches, they say, "This is good. I think I'll become a tennis player." But at the beginning, she didn't. And I'm sure you've seen this with youngsters too. Nothing succeeds like success. So,
the Bryan brothers.
That's my Lisa Ray.
The Bryan brothers called her money because for the longest time, the Bryan brothers shared the same bank account. They put all the money in one pile. And I think it was Bob who played some mixed with Lisa Raymond. So he used to tease his brother. He goes, it's just not a 50-50 split. I played mixed doubles with money, so I should get a greater percentage of that. I know your friend who you introduced me to, Dennis Alter. He helped her get started on the pro tour financially, and then she did so well. She right away was able to pay him back and just do it, stand alone financially.
We're having dinner with him in Newport Coast on Sunday, and I did she pay him back? I hope she did. I have no idea.
Yeah, he told me that she did.
Good, excellent, because I like to hear that. Because there's a lot of people who put a lot of money into other people, and they don't get paid back. So this is a good thing. There's another topic that I'm scared to approach, but if you're sitting down, I am. And let me hear your thoughts, because I have some interesting thoughts, and it's called pickleball.
We've talked about it quite a bit. What I would say right now on pickleball, if you can't beat them, join them. I think that we've made so many mistakes in tennis that pickleball shouldn't be invading tennis. I know in San Diego, when they had the National 18s, it became national news, probably not too far from where you live, where these pickleballers just showed up and were going to take over the tennis facility. But they needed the tennis facility that week for the kids, even though it wasn't the tournament site. I watched someone today. I mean, it's like the 70s. I live adjacent to a 65-acre park that has it has 6 pickleball courts. And there's so many pros that they've just jumped ship. And again, I think the PTR and the USPTA. I mean, I've been a member forever. I've been a tester, and I don't think overnight it's such a casual pickup sport that the PTR should have become. Now they're the pickleball organization, and the USPTA is the pickleball organization. And I really think that what people should be saying is you need to learn tennis skills, and then play pickleball, and then play tennis. But people are out there, just like in the 70s, they're just making it up. And the people, I was watching a man today, he obviously played tennis quite well. You can just see how he volleys a pickleball. He's a tennis player, and he's chasing the buck. And at this park, there's 16, that's why we love to go to the park, there's 16 racquetball courts, 3-wall racquetball. So there's 16 lighted backboards, and that's the best way to practice tennis. And And many times the tennis courts are empty. The parking lot is jam-packed, and it's standing room only to play pickleball. And what are your thoughts on pickleball?
Well, a couple of things. One, Tina and I, it's around us, and I've put 4 courts into the bubble at Narberth, into our indoor club, because, again, join them or else. It's very noisy, and I couldn't put it in Gulf Mills. I couldn't put it into Narberth, structure, because the clack just doesn't do it for the tennis players next door. So it's a big problem with the noise. And Tina and I have never actually, we both probably tried it once. I described it as an orchestra. I say I'm seriously in the strings section. I am not in the percussion section. So that's my first thought. The second thought is I got a new knee last year, exactly a year ago, by the way, and I'm playing 5 times a week. So any of your older pupils who need it, tell them to do it. There's no question in terms of quality of life. I don't fear falling. There's a lot of stuff. Anyhow, and I went to PT after getting the knee, and more than half the people at the PT were pickleball injuries. And it's what you're saying. It's people who have never played a racket sport, and they pick it up quite easily. It's anybody, can play. And they start playing, and they get a lob, and they go back flat onto the lob instead of sideways. And they fall, and they put their hands out, and they break a wrist or whatever it is. A lot of pickleball injuries, because these are not racket players. They're not racket sports players. That's my second thought on pickleball. Definitely join them. There's no question about it. Arvind was at a symposium now for Middle States, or a lot of the people were there saying just what you've said, is that we've got to welcome them, because it'll help. My other thought about pickleball is, from a business point of view, there's no money in it. I've always laughed and said tennis players are cheap. They'll try all our demo rackets, and then they'll buy it from Tennis Warehouse or somewhere. Pickleball, much worse. They're used to going to the public parks, as you're describing. They're used to going to the indoor YMCAs, where they've just put up a pickleball court somewhere and paying $1 an hour or $2 an hour. So there's no real, unless Bobby Riggs' club over here has gone all pickleball, and it works on you pay a monthly subscription, you can play as much as you want. That can work. I think pickleball will become viable as a business when it comes to the juniors, because there's no lessons really to be had amongst certainly the men and the women too, because it's so easy to pick it up. What do you do after you've taught them how the rules, So I think when juniors come into pickleball, a la Noah Rubin, who will inspire some young people to play, I think it'll become a viable business proposition.
With pickleball, I know racquetball became an official sport in 1968, and racquetball has really fallen off.
Absolutely.
here in Florida, they play it outdoors with 3 walls. Um,
Yes.
do you see pickleball going in the direction of racquetball, where it becomes obsolete, or you think it's just going to grow and grow and grow?
I think it'll grow and grow. I don't think it's going to become absolute because it's not such a racquetball is a bit of a thuggish sport, whereas we like to hit the ball up and over the net. Racquetball, really, you're hitting the ball down. The lower, the closer it gets to the crack. As even compared to squash, which has the tin in the front, this thing, the best racquetball shot is the one that hits the crack at where the court meets. And it's just not. It's just I played a racquetball tournament. I had my watch stolen, so it's different. No, I don't think pickleball is going to die, but I think it's good in a way, as you said. It could be good for tennis.
Yeah, I think that you should tell people, learn tennis skills, and then you can play racquetball, and then it's bridge sport. I never heard that term until maybe a year ago. Dave Fish, the retired coach from Harvard, it's called spec tennis, and it's now it's obviously made of a different material. But years ago, Althea Gibson, probably the greatest story, but Bobby Riggs and Pancho Gonzalez started playing it's called paddle tennis, and the only courts right now in America, not platform tennis, which they have quite a bit of in Philadelphia, but paddle tennis, still out in California, Venice Beach. You can go there and watch it be played, where you just puncture a tennis ball, and it's a bridge sport. If you play with the right mallet, the right type of racket, you have to have very similar skills to that in tennis. But with the thing about pickleball, I have been told that you have to play swing volleys to be really effective. But I think that there should be some meetings of the minds to say, okay, let's have both sports grow. So I think if they adjusted the racket slightly, but they probably won't, because it's almost like, it's wiffle ball. Baseball's more difficult than softball, and softball is more difficult than wiffle ball. And I think it fits society. It's instant gratification. It's easy. It's fast. It's a microwave sport. Instant coffee. And tennis is so much the opposite. Years ago, Newsweek magazine said that you could transfer athletic skills from other sports. In an hour and a half, you could learn how to play racquetball. I think that applies.
Correct.
I think that applies to pickleball. I mean, I think they just need to teach you how to stand. I should say not how to stand, but where to stand.
And how to get out of the kitchen. Steve, by the way, picking up on what you said, I started playing squash in South Africa right at the end of my tennis career, and picked it up in 1 year. When I came to America, I ended up playing squash for America at the Maccabiah Games at the age of 32, because I could volley from the tee, and that all comes from tennis. So there's no question that the tennis background. And then, of course, what you were saying about the red ball and the green ball and all the rest of it, the yellow ball, that's really simplified tennis and made it a lot easier for juniors. And that's been very successful. I presume you feel the same?
No, I do. I think that you still have to teach kids technique. But no, it's I think to have kids go out and play, especially with a green dot ball on a 60-foot court. I think they're the transition balls. I think they're great learning tools. I one time was in charge of squash courts, and I hired the squash coach at Cornell to train some of the staff, like 25 pros.
Uh-huh.
But I remember saying, squash, I can spell it, but I can't cook it. I mean, I knew nothing about squash. But I did find out about the different balls and the North American surface, or the North American dimensions than the international. But I understand now that it's all one ball. It's all one standard space.
It's the international, the overseas ball. They had a game here when I first came with a hard ball. It was scary. You get hit by that, and it was just a bullet. The softball is much better. Steve, another question to you, which has become big in the Philadelphia area, padel. The game that comes from Spain. Do you know it?
Very little. Let me come back to that, but let me say a couple more things about squash. When you watch really good squash players play, they have to have such great mobility.
And it's unbelievable.
Hopman years ago, he wanted his players to play with their opposite hand so they wouldn't have imbalance injuries where they say the right side becoming too big. But you find Federer, and he'd get way out. You don't want to have kids do it if they're only in the alley, but so he's like almost on the next court and he plays what people would call this amazing squash shot. I was in Switzerland at a junior tournament with 14 and unders, and waiting for court time. There were squash courts, so I had the players I was with in the squash courts with the tennis ball hitting tennis shots. And the Swiss kids or the European kids that were familiar with squash, I just got a great lesson being there, because what they did is they just went in and played squash with a tennis ball and a tennis racket. It's like in South Africa. It's amazing. You go to a picnic and people are, they're playing a make-up version of cricket. But I just put two and two together. I'm just guessing that Federer, and I know he played squash, but that's where I went in. It's okay. Let's hit some ground strokes, hit some volleys, hit some serves, and the other kids just came in and said, "Hey, we're on break. Let's just grab the tennis racket, tennis ball, and play squash that way." And then as a result, you can play those emergency shots. You play those balls that get behind you with a continental grip. But padel, I've just puzzled where the National Tennis Center has these new courts and it's so expensive. We have a fact checker. I would say it's like $80 an hour. But no, I think also just watching it be played, and I think my experience is more, even though I've seen it played live in person, just looking at it via YouTube. Like squash, though, I think it really enhances athletic ability. That's the first thing I would say. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's just what you said. It's really for a good player. There's nothing in the middle. And again, from a business point of view, because, eventually it's going to come down to a bottom line, it's for people on a court, very difficult to teach. Where do you put the coach? What you're seeing on the YouTube is magnificent. I mean, they're running out of the court and hitting the ball over the fence and getting it back into play. It's amazing. And the people who play it, good tennis players who play it, say it's the most amazing game. I just look at the big picture, and just as racquetball died, I don't think it's too expensive. The courts are $80,000 to $100,000 each, and I don't know. Although it's become the rave in Philadelphia.
Well, so, I do think with tennis, in some ways, I think we've done a poor job waving our own flag. Let's have tennis be for tennis. I mean, the governing body of tennis in this country, the USTA, that they have the Disney World of tennis in Orlando, and I've heard people say it's going to become the USRA. It's going to be the United States Racket Association, because now they have pickleball and they have padel. It's not just tennis.
That's interesting.
And coming back to the USPTA and PTR. I just don't think that you can overnight say, okay, I'm going to certify people as a pickleball instructor. And they were tennis associations, and say to stay true to tennis. I just think that we've made all sorts of mistakes with tennis, and I think pickleball is, you could even though there's many other reasons to touch upon, it is a byproduct of poor management with group dynamics. I mean, just think of the numbers you had in your camps over the years, and you can get all sorts of people on a tennis court. I mean, just think at Haverford College with a beautiful campus. So it rains, and your whole group has to go in that field house and make it happen. And I think what's happening in tennis too many times now, it's more of a subservient role where it's one coach, and then especially, you spend so much time in Philadelphia, you get 7,200 square feet of lighted and heated space, and you've got one coach and one player. It's not a great business model.
No, 100%. Absolutely. Very interesting and absolutely absolutely correct. It's it'll be interesting, and also a little competition. It's like this live golf. I'm let it be. They're bringing in big money. They're challenging the golf association, and there's room for two pizza places. The Chanay or whatever his name is, who good golfer with a French name. You would know it probably. He's part of the live thing, and
I should.
and he.
I don't. Golf's a four-letter word. I'm just teasing.
Yeah, right. Dejanay or something. He was on the other day, and he said, this business of the golf people saying if you belong to live, you can't play in the PGA. He said if somebody's got a pizza place and somebody opens up down the road, just because the guy's gone to the one down the road doesn't mean he can't come back to the first one. And I thought it was a good analogy. I was quite impressed by him. And yeah, so I think, this pickleball, maybe it's going to give tennis a run. It's going to say, hey guys, make this more friendly. I don't know, make it easier, make it something.
Well, work harder, work smarter. It's competition should be healthy. It's like McDonald's on one corner, and next thing it's Burger King across the street.
Yeah.
But I think too many tennis people are jumping ship, and it's like, okay, now I'm teaching pickleball, and how can you? To me, how could you be a pickleball expert overnight? I mean, my background, I feel like people they should really at least 3 years work as a volunteer before they even accept money. So the way I look at it, I just think that so many people, they're, as you said, hang up your shingle, gift a gab. All you need to be a tennis teacher is a ball hopper and ego.
Yeah, interesting. I love it.
Tennis has always been very unregulated, but pickleball is taking the same path. It's just,
Also, there's not as many nuances, it seems, in pickleball as in tennis. Tennis, as you said, is a lifelong learning experience in terms of teaching it.
Oh,
you're still finding
just to get someone to be able to rally. We repeat Dick Braden humor all the time. Is people buy the clothes, adults buy the tennis clothes and wear them to the grocery store because tennis is so difficult. So now you've been retired since 2020. You haven't been running the camp since 2020.
We still run day tennis camps, and that's been very good, very successful. Still have a good reputation in the Philadelphia area. Have great coaches that have been with me I'm still about quality. We were talking today, Tina and I, and it's the Ritz-Carlton slogan. We are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. So, we try to be as professional as can be, and that's been great for us. So we've been filling up in the summers and the winters indoors with junior clinics and also adults too. So, but it's much less. It's hard to believe where we were, and we're not sad about it, Steve. We're kind of, the writing may have been on the walls that the camps needed to close because it was just so big, and so we were doing $15 million a year, which was crazy, and so maybe it's great that, and it was much easier. It sounds callous for me to close because I took my name with me. I could have sold the name, but Tina and I discussed it, and she especially said, you've got, we were known. In fact, Huvela and I did a joint venture with one camp, and he phoned me afterwards, and he did say, he said, you're the Four Seasons, and we're the Holiday Inn of camping. And our cultures don't go well together. And of course, we're still great friends. He's coming to the racket club, the beach club next week to play the father-son or whatever. But anyhow, so I basically we took our name and didn't sell it, and moved on, and so in a way, COVID was very good for us. There was somebody upstairs telling us, enough, I'm 73, Tina's 68, and it's time to enjoy whatever time we've got left and not have to worry about so many kids. We had about 400 or 500 people working. And so, so COVID in that respect was good. And, me with my conscience couldn't have let Sarah and Steve Robertson go as easily as it happened, because I would have just said I owe them, and what we talked about, an obligation. But instead, I just gave everybody 3 weeks notice, and nobody sued me either. Today, if you let somebody go, especially if they're over 40, you're in trouble. So it was good. So Tina and I are just enjoying our tennis very much, playing on soft court, which is an anomaly in California. You know that. Where we are in San Diego is about the 7th largest city in the country, and there are 11 hard true courts here. 11.
Are they all the same place?
No, I wish they were. I mean, Barnes has got 2 red carpet courts, and where we are at this golf club, Rancho Santa Fe Golf Club, has 2 clay courts, that's 2 hard true, and about 8 hard courts. And it's really sad, whereas where you are in Florida, especially the East Coast, the West Coast too, there are dozens of hard true courts. There's 11 clay courts here, and my friend who's a orthopedic surgeon says he's really having a good time because everybody bangs themselves out on these hard courts. And of course, they have no patience. They can't play. Tina's very good at it because she's got, drop shots and slices and dices and topspin and lobs, and she's good at it. But the normal California, the old story, the Californian long forehand and backhand is nothing more. Nobody's got any great finesse or patience.
One thing about pickleball that there's, say, just in Boca Raton, which is right around the corner from where I'm sitting, is they're not playing pickleball on clay at this point. But I've heard discussions where they're trying to come up with a new and improved ball where you can play pickleball on clay. So
they need a more silent bat too, because at the moment it's just crazy, bang bang. It's like drums. It really is. Whereas we're all such purists. We like the noise of a violin, the sweet sounds.
Julian, if you could touch upon it, Steve Robinson, I know he had so much to do in this area with. You brought in so many people from all over the world for obviously a very unique experience, and it was a win-win-win for everybody involved. I know you helped me get a few people visas where they came through you and they were lent out to where they did some work for us.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that experience in bringing in so many people from overseas. I mean, when I used to go to your orientation, it was just amazing. The coaches were from everywhere. Yes.
Steve, it's the old, I've always believed in immigrants, especially legal ones. It's an immigrant mentality, they're hungry. I truly believe that's the reason why we're not producing such great players in America, is that, it's a land of plenty, and you get these hungry Russians doing what they have to do. And also the organization. I mean, I'm so happy for Canada, by the way, because Tennis Canada has really got themselves together. But I've always believed, being an immigrant myself, that there's no such thing as it's not my job. And we've had such wonderful people from overseas. I'm sad to say that Steve Robertson would handle all the hiring, and he'd say 10% of the Americans that he hired for the summer would quit or wouldn't come. Whereas with immigrants, admittedly it was a visa issue too, but nobody ever let us down. I've had a great love affair with immigrants. I think their work ethic, they're not spoiled. I mean, Americans, we've had such a good life here. You could see what happens.
No, actually,
Do you feel the same, by the way?
100%. Well, the Canadians, actually, we have two Canadians here right now that they play well enough in the younger age groups to represent Canada. And I do think from the outside, we think that, Tennis Canada really has it together, but what's really going on is the immigrants. Hungry dog hunts best. It's like you mentioned, or we both have talked about Federer. His mother was an immigrant. She goes to a new country, learns a new language, new way of life. His wife is from Slovakia.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. Bianca and Dennis and Felix, they're all immigrants. The Fernandez girl, Leila Fernandez, made a video for her sister Bianca, and don't know that much about the story, but it's hard work. I like the John McEnroe. I don't know if it's an original, but affluenza. My oldest brother used to say it's very difficult to have rich parents and poor kids, and
affluenza. Steve, we should be. You know what? I'll re-listen to this podcast because you're saying such wonderful stuff.
Definition for
Absolutely.
research is steal, baby, steal. As I said, I just have a few of my own lines. With you and Tina, you I guess you could come back to the Steve Robinson, but just I was going to ask you. You travel so much, but to have people come in, I mean, that required a lot of work as far as just all the documentation and such, correct?
Yes. Oh, yeah. No. It's what's happening now with our immigrants versus before, and we're not going to get into heavy politics, but the marketing of everything, it comes down to that in terms of a business, and that's where obviously Tina came in. She really developed a classy act for me. When we would go to camp fairs in Paris or all over the world where people would show their goods, and Tina would come up with her brochures and her logos and her everything. Many of them copied us. I mean, many times have I heard, "Gosh, you're the Rolls Royce of programming."
Well, I think to ask with what you built, you would think that the people that are the guardians of tennis, and I don't want to always be pointing fingers at the USTA, but the people that are trying to, they're responsible for the growth and welfare of tennis. That you and Tina should have a voice on this is what we need to do with camps. I mean, you've done it, and I do think that too many people just wing it. It's like, well, okay, it's so easy to put a tennis camp together, but it's not the case.
But Steve, this applies to you too, and we've talked about it in the past. If I were running, and funny, John Lloyd talks about the fact that he wanted the job at the LTA for many years. He said I could have put them right, and the USTA should have made you the chairman a long time ago. And the problem is it's a not-for-profit organization. I tell the story that I wanted to see what was going on in Lake Nona, and I went there, and Woods, she was working there, whatever her name was, and she took me around, and I was quite impressive. There were 100 courts, and they all had the little cameras on them and everything in the indoors, and I spent from about 12 to 3 walking around asking her questions, Kathy Woods, and there was not one tennis player on the court, not one. And so I decided the next morning to go and see my old friend Nick. Is he alive? Is he doing okay? What?
With Nick, yes, I check on it every day. It's maybe it was 10 days ago where it was let out that Nick had passed away.
Yes.
But they didn't.
I picked up on that.
They didn't. Then once they called that back, said no, he has not passed away. They didn't think he was going to make it past Thanksgiving, but no, he's still hanging in there. I think that Nick, he's 91. Who knows? Maybe he's in there for another 9 years. But
the news of my demise has been greatly exaggerated. Um, yeah, but anyhow, so I decided the next day to go to Nick's place and see what they were doing. Steve, it was unbelievable. The place was hopping, and it was the morning, and the kids were out on the courts, and the music was blaring. Good old Nick, same kind of situation. Of course, I saw his new buildings and all the new facilities and the school and everything. And one was not for profit, and the other was for profit. Gavin told me that they did gangbusters there.
Kathy Woods, her husband Ron Woods, he's from your neck of the woods in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Ed Faulkner was highly regarded as one of the best tennis teachers in America in the 60s. He wrote a book. He actually went to Cornell and he just took classes. He didn't get a degree. He just took classes that would make him a better tennis teacher. Well, Kathy Woods, she played tennis at Penn and she hits the ball really well. And the people in player development at the USTA, they would come over and tell Kathy, she's so nice. I mean, they'd say, well, you really need to incorporate the slice backhand. And I just talked to her one time. I said, well, why don't they just come and watch you hit balls? But I think, communication would solve most problems. I think with John Lloyd was Raven Klaasen's coach for World Team Tennis. And I always just tell Raven, I said, you're not going to school. And he was sent to us when he was 18 years old. I said, you're going to learn how to teach tennis. Because, everybody should learn how to teach tennis.
Before they teach tennis, yes.
Yeah, no, but just you're a player. You should study the game. It's not that complicated to figure, okay, the tennis court's a rectangle, and it's just core information is not that complicated. But that's where one time I saw a photo of John McEnroe sitting between Bill Gates and Larry Ellison. And I said, gee, I'd like to talk to those two guys. If I could talk to those two guys about what could be done for tennis, because it really there's no substitute for good beginning. We have to do a better job with. I mean, it's very, very difficult, as you know, for entry-level adults. But kids come in and if they don't learn to rally, Vandermeer was great, and I know you knew Dennis so well. Is that he used to just say if you can't get them to rally, they're not going to get the bug. They're not going to get it. They're not going to get connected with tennis. And so that comes back to instruction. It doesn't have to be space age instruction, but can you get a kid to just tap a ball back and forth over the net? But someone like Klaasen, I think with Raven, I saw his father recently. He was over here to represent South Africa in an age group tournament. That he's 40, but teaching teaching is information transfer, and it's unfortunate. You listen to the commentators on TV; they're giving out subjective information. They don't really explain why. I just solve tennis education, and coming back to 7,200 square feet, $100 an hour, one coach, one player. What's that going to turn into? So, like when you came over to this country, you could touch upon that. You came in the heyday of the tennis boom. The tiebreaker had just been invented, and you had to know group dynamics.
Well, Steve, two other points to add. By the way, you talk about hitting the ball over the net. If you remember when the Green Prince came into being, it was such a boost to tennis because those people who were hitting the ball on the wood or wherever they were hitting the ball, all of a sudden could hit it in the strings. The big one, the big Green Prince.
Yeah, no,
that was a major thing.
I picked that up. I was teaching tennis with Andy Brandy in 1979 out in the Hamptons, and I just started hitting with it. And then after the summer, I had to play with that racket. I couldn't go back. But here's a funny story about the Prince racket is Dr. Mayer. Dr. Mayer, Sandy and Gene Mayer, both top 10 players in the world.
Yeah.
Gene Mayer, I asked one time at a teaching conference, he was with George Basho, and I said, well, your father had a system, but why are you and Sandy play so differently? And Billy Martin, who at one time was probably the best youngest player next to Borg in the history of tennis at one time, you just think about Grand Slams, junior Grand Slams won.
Yeah.
And Gene Mayer said, well, in the 12 and unders, I used to just entertain myself. I won the finals against Billy Martin 0-0. Anyway, he played two hands on both sides. And when he went to Stanford,
Yeah.
Dick Gould told him,
Yeah.
at this level, you can only play one of your two shots two-handed. And he thought that what he would do is change his forehand to a one-handed forehand. But he played at Stanford with a two-handed forehand, and he sliced his backhand. And then he came on. Then he came on the tour, and then he became sixth in the world. And people thought it was because of the oversized racket. Now, the oversized racket really helped the recreational player, but at his level, what really helped him is he went back to hitting a two-handed backhand. He wasn't just slicing the backhand side. But
makes absolute sense.
Yeah,
Steve, I have another business for you.
Yeah.
You ready? I am the king of, and I don't charge, so it's not a business, of teaching 60, 65 and upwards. There's actually a business in this. It's not teaching topspin backhands. It's saying to them, guys, you're going to be playing doubles. You've got to hit the underspin for backhand. You've got to hit the drop shot. You've got to hit an underhand serve. And I am having an absolute ball here and back home in Philadelphia working with these players. They're good players, but and you know what? In terms of a business, they're prepared to pay. They all offer me money, and I'm laughing, saying, no, I'm getting great pleasure out of this. But nobody has really picked up teaching 60, 65, and 70-year-olds.
So you're suggesting that you underhand serves, but also the drop shot's very effective, correct? I mean, they have such a difficult time moving up, right?
Correct, and playing inside the serve line, meaning because the drop shot's so effective. I mean, there's a guy like Jimmy Parker, who was number one in the 70s, 75. He stands virtually on the service line, playing inside the baseline. But Jimmy Parker stands just about inside the service line to return serve. And you know what he's going to do? He's going to drop it, or he's going to flick one deep and come to net. But there's a whole array of, you call them emergency shots. That was Peter Burwash, shame that, who I really reconnected through you in Tyler, who wrote the whole chapter on emergency tennis.
Right.
Short of between your legs. I mean, the Federer slice, I can't get to the ball. And so, by the way, when people start playing that, I think they're just tired. They're getting lazy because they can't get to the ball. So they end up hitting these slash emergency shots. But anyhow, there is a business in senior tennis. I know Morton wrote a book on it,
Jason Morton.
The fella from, the Texan who used to play with my friend who's from Tyler.
Russell Seymour.
Yeah. And so he wrote a book on senior tennis. And I'm telling you, these guys are craving for pointers. It's not so much repetition, it's just pointers.
Here's something on
Keep
Jason.
it in mind.
Here's something on Jason Morton. I come back to the old man tennis, but Jason Morton, he was the umpire. He was in the chair for the Billie Jean King, Bobby Riggs match. And one thing that really happened to Bobby is that he was just partied out. I don't want to take anything away. I don't want to take anything away from Billy, but the morning of that match, he was hustling matches. And Russell Seymour, I saw him at. You hooked me up with Dennis Alter, and I was at the 70s, and you could just see the players had the continental grips. But there's a history to all that. Is that the 3 Grand Slams were on grass, and people were playing the second week on spikes, and the bounces were so bad, and the wooden rackets. But
100%.
Here's my theory. I know you won a 60 nationals. I think you won that because of a low carb diet and you can move.
Right. That's all that. By the way, that's all that works in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Is these little guys are running like bastards and getting every ball back.
Yeah.
And those are the guys who are winning.
Are you still on that low carb diet? You're still skinny as a rail?
I wish. No, I'm about 10 over. But
that's when you won that mobility. I mean, obviously, it's like riding a bicycle. So you just don't forget. So you were a very good tennis player at a very good age, and it's not muscle memory; it's brain memory. It's neurological. So you're programmed to hit the ball, but you can move. And I think that's one thing too with old man tennis is, but the thing is positioning is that, if you look at Rosewall, Connors and
Yeah,
Agassi, they had such long careers because they played so close to the baseline. If you want to have a
yeah,
long
yeah.
career, play close to the baseline. These five players are playing further back. And then obviously Nadal's a heavy runner, but that's one thing that would help a Djokovic or a Federer. Certainly body type and so many things, but when you play closer to the baseline, there's a lot less miles on the legs.
Yeah, and also, nowadays a half volley was a sign of weakness. You never got caught hitting a half volley because today you have Federer or Djokovic just picking up that ball on the baseline and whacking it wherever they want to on a half volley. So yes, I mean, why not? And volleying from mid-court, that's part of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, that kind of stuff. Swing volleys, I'm busy discussing with an 85-year-old who can't get enough power on a high ball at the net, and he's determined to work on a swing volley. And so there's a whole array of funny shots that these guys are playing now, and it's great. Good for them. And then they can play forever. Then, of course.
I want to go back to the question. Bobby Riggs' tennis facility in San Diego is all pickleball?
Yes. Pretty well all. I think there's one or two courts left. Lonnie Cool comes for dinner once a week. He loves Tina. And he was Bobby's, I don't know, he was carrying his rackets. And Lonnie in the movie is the one who's announcing with a funny jacket. And he taught Steve Carell the underspin backhand that Bobby Riggs had in the movie. And he agrees, by the way, because I often, he doesn't drink, but if he would, I'm trying to get some truth out of him about Bobby Riggs. But he says he was worn out.
Yeah.
And yeah. Steve, what do you think of transsexual in tennis?
Well, let me go back to hang on to that. Lorne Kuehl, he's from Springfield, Illinois. He was Jimmy Connors' shadow. They were hanging around guys.
Correct.
This is where I need Tina's training. I ran a workshop at the University of Illinois, and his brother was there.
Yes.
I got his brother to start telling Lorne stories, and I've met Lorne a few times. So I don't know him, but I remember his brother asked me.
Such a character.
His brother asked me, "Do you have a book?" And then the sister, I think she was the coach at Western Michigan. And,
Correct.
So you remember them saying, "Have you written a book?" And I said, "I don't even have a business card." I guess now I have a little bit of a book online with some of these videos we have. But what was your question? I think I just have to say I have no idea.
Okay, we'll come back to that. But by the way, when you were talking, Tina and I both agree this has to be put down somewhere, more than just the stories you have just told us in the last 2 hours are a quarter of a book. And you know what? If you don't do it, your grandkids will forget about, for other people. Just do it for your own family. And I've talked a lot of people into this. It's not difficult. But my question is transsexual. And the reason I'm asking it is Tina and I went to a play where the girl was saying thank you to her dad. She was a swimmer for getting up at 5 o'clock every morning. The old story and how much he sacrificed and all that. And she's going to get a place on the Olympic team. And then she comes home and says, "Dad, but there's a girl who's just joined our club who's got stronger times than I have, better times." And that girl was a boy. And then we discussed with the writer of the play afterwards. And I got up and I said, with all due respect, the number 2,000, what would you say, Steve? 3,000 man can, as much as one admires Serena, the number 2,000 or 3,000 man can beat her. And when it comes to money or whatever, somebody's going to say, okay, I'll take the drugs, I'll do what I have to do because I'm going to make as much money as Serena. Some guy, I should say. By the way, what is that number that can beat Serena?
Actually, if you go with history, like Billy Mays used to practice with Billie Jean King or Larry Gottfried with Chris Everett, Sharapova. I mean, so many times I'd be at the Eddie Herr, and same thing. So Billie Jean King with Billy Mays, so he's in the 16s. Larry Gottfried was the 16s. You mentioned John Lloyd. I remember watching John Lloyd practice with Chris Everett, and they drew the lines on the clay so the court wasn't as wide, so they took a foot and a half off either side, and he had to serve underhand, and he couldn't come to the net, so it was obviously a great workout for him because her ground strokes, she's like a machine. But no, the 16. So once the serve comes into it, I think of my son Connor. He wouldn't want to hear this, but we had a girl from Japan. First year 16s. I mean, they would play, and she would win. Breadsticks and bagels, 1-0. A year later, he was beating her by the same score because he just got bigger, he got stronger in his serve, and
stronger
in the movement. Yeah. I know that you and I, so many different things. We talked about you and I. You did it, I think, before I did. Went to spend some time watching Jimmy Everett, Chrissy Everett's father, teach tennis. Just picking up balls.
You've got a great memory.
But I actually had the opportunity to watch Renee Richards. And at that time, he was coaching Naratilova. And I said, gee, can I just have permission to just sit over here and just listen and just watch this? And there's so many things that have gone before us. But I remember being at a tennis camp one summer, and then they went back the next summer. And I said, did I teach you last summer? And the woman said, yes, you did. But last summer, I was a man. And, live and let live. But actually, Naratilova, when she was first asked about a man competing in women's sports, she said, no way. And then she
was angry, I know.
And then she was asked to call it back, and then she got, I guess, a little bit political or diplomatic. But no, it gets into politics, but it's just wrong. With, the world's upside down, inside out. There's no more common sense. And, people years ago said, hey, the U.S. is going to hell in a handbasket. I mean, those type of things just can't happen. There needs to be rhyme and reason, and it's like, no way, Jose.
Yep. By the way, I was, when the kids lose to a girl in the camp, they start crying and all the rest of it, the boys. And I say, no worries, you shouldn't be crying. I was number 2 seed at the Maccabiah Games in 1971, which means I was the second best Jewish tennis player supposedly in the world. It's before the big ones came along. But anyhow, and that's a very small book. And the first round I played this fellow who was from Yale, and he was a left-hander, and I lost to him. And 6 months later, Richard became Renee, and we're still great friends. She sent me a lot of pupils. She was an ophthalmologist in New York. So, yeah, I've had the feeling myself. She's a lovely lady, lovely man, whatever you want to call it. But anyhow.
Yeah, she became top 10 in the world. But, that's actually someone changing from man to woman and everything that goes with that. But, the way it is right now, it's like, Tommy can just wake up on Monday morning and say, I want to be Terry, and it just doesn't make any sense.
Identify is the word, Steve. Identify.
Yeah.
Tina has a theory on that. Where's the line? But anyhow, it'll be interesting to see where all this goes. Yeah, interesting. Well, Steve, I would like just if we're going to end up somewhere, 5 things that come to mind. Pearls, Steve Smith pearls about tennis life.
Well, I think actually,
what would you say?
I certainly could come up with that. The wit and wisdom, use my name in third person, Steve Smith, it was written on a piece of confetti. But
Smithism.
But I
do you have a list of them?
I do think that we have some people on the podcast that they've told me that they've listened to every one, and now we're pretty deep into it. But not to flip it, but I mean, you've from being a student, a player, a teacher, camp and club owner, entrepreneur. I think for our listeners, our audience would be, I think, many parents driving their kids to tennis practice. So parents, players, teaching pros. Why don't you? We could talk all night. Why don't you give me a few pearls? I can chime in.
Oh, no, you're much better at this.
Your philosophies. I think it's
You know,
very much.
there's a famous Jewish story where a fellow went to Rabbi Hillel and he said, "Teach me the words of the Torah. Teach me everything while standing on one leg." And Rabbi Hillel said, "Okay, get on the one leg and say after me, treat everyone the way you want to be treated." And if there be one summary of our life, it's that, you know, just don't believe your own press. Keep your head down and watch the ball, which has nothing to do with tennis. You know, be humble and respectful, and you know, we're so small compared to everything else. So and I think the most important thing is gratitude, grateful. Tina and I live with gratitude. She says I'm a little crazy. She says my cup is more than half full. And be satisfied with your half, because you only get a half. I use 80%. We all only get 80%. And if you're happy with your 80%, you're fine. You know, we strive for 100, but it doesn't happen. So
you mentioned Peter Burwash. You know, that's where my lines, I have to give credit, where Peter used to say, "You come in the world with nothing, you leave with nothing. So appreciate everything in between." He was an inspirational guy, Peter Burwash.
Wasn't he just? He stayed at our house when he was lecturing to some of our players, and Tina took him to work one morning, and she said, "What gets you going?
What motivates you?" And he says, "I wake up every morning to serve."
Nice, huh?
Yeah,
that's great.
And,
actually, you know, here's a story. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Go. No.
Well, I was just going to say, with Tennis Tech, as you know, certainly you helped out with providing so many opportunities for the graduates, but Peter Burwash was the first person of name to come to Tennis Tech. He called me, and you know, he showed up and he didn't want any money. I mean, it was just a per diem.
Yeah.
I mean, we paid his airfare, that was it. And I remember being very nervous with Peter being a vegetarian. Okay, where are we going to take this guy to lunch? We went to Dairy Queen for every meal, and he didn't have a hamburger. He had a milkshake. And, but Peter, yeah, he was the first person to call up. But then once he came, it was. I couldn't get anybody to the USPTA at that time to even answer my phone calls, but I remember going to spend on my own nickel. I was being paid $13,000 a year. Of course, I mean, I could supplement my income coaching on the weekends and such in the summers, but I spent a week with Dennis. So then once Dennis showed up with a PTR talking about competition, next thing you know, the USPTA, I was their best friend. They're calling me up. But Peter Burwash, rest in peace, Peter. He's really had a lot to do with that happening, because he created the spark. He was the first guy there, and he just
absolutely.
He read what I was doing. He goes, "I want to come and find out about what you're doing." Amazing guy.
But he also set the standard for putting pros in country clubs and facilities, because I mean, even here, Steve Harvison has been at the Four Seasons here for probably 35 years. He had very strict standards for his coaches: no smoking, no drinking, no cursing, and fabulous.
Even with dress. I mean, he had a major impact on the training I did for coaches, just like how to conduct interviews. We used to have practice interviews, and you know, I remember I didn't really have a good handle on casual dress for the gals. But the guys, you know, you show up with a khaki slacks and blue blazer, necktie, so you can look, you know, you don't look overdressed, and then you have your tennis gear and your shoulder bag. I mean, a thank you letter. That's a handwritten thank you letter. It's just all gone away.
Yeah, I spoke at one of these conferences, and Tina was amazed. I think we got 60 handwritten letters, thank you notes. So wonderful. He sent both his daughters to our enrichment camp. They did our film program, and it was wonderful. I mean, it's sad. I mean, look, we're all going to go, but his last 3 to 5 years were not great. So
Here's
who knows?
the gratefulness. Actually, we dedicated a couple of podcasts to Peter. And
Nice.
one of his pros, when he passed away, was just looking online, and he's coming to visit. We're going to have him on a podcast to just talk about Peter. That's what we're trying to do, is reinforce the pillars of what we put together
The history
in the '80s. And certainly Peter was one of
Terrific.
them. Here's
Terrific.
gratefulness
Bless your
for
heart.
you. Roger Federer.
Yeah.
It's kind of a tongue twister, but it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice.
Nice.
When they ask the Fed, what's your motto, and that's what he says. Now with that,
Yes.
certainly the two of you've employed a number of tennis pros in the summer. Sometimes you got to crack the whip, and you can't be nice. I mean, you're trying to, get a teenage boy to change an attitude adjustment, from the neck up, a checkup from the neck up. But that's what Roger says. Is it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. And it's amazing how he's handled himself. Unbelievable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We were laughing this morning. I was reading Golda Meir's quote, and she said to Henry Kissinger, "Why are you so humble? You're not so great." Yeah, so who knows? Steve, this is for me. It's been a learning experience. Thank you. It always is. I mean,
I'm glad.
between Tina and
Very appreciative. I'm glad Tina, she jumped on. That was great.
yeah, no, she's a great fan of yours, as I am.
It's always a pleasure to be in the company of both of you together.
Yeah, but of greatness.
Yeah.
Steve Smith, good for you.
We'll have to get together. San Diego is a great place to visit.
Please,
Please.
With
anytime, any excuse.
But no, we'll have to do round two. This was fun. There's so many things we could talk about with just go back from players like Laver or Emerson, and I know you've met all these people, and there's so many stories to share.
We see a lot of him. Next week we're seeing him again. Every time we're here in San Diego, we go for lunch or dinner with him.
With Roy.
And Joy. And it's nice. I don't know if the young people today have the stories of the older players. Those were good days, By the way, I'll end. He told us some really funny stories, but 2 weeks ago we were with him, and he told Tina and I one of the funniest stories, and he said, "Do you know the Cormans in Philadelphia?" And we said, "Yes, we do. I used to actually teach the wife. Very wealthy real estate people, Corman Properties." And he said, Fred Stolle and I used to stay with him every time we played the U.S. Pro Indoors, Marilyn Fernberger's Pro tournament at the Spectrum. And one night we were playing doubles, and we finished late, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. We came back to their house. Everybody was asleep, and Fred and I were starving, especially Fred. And, we had a couple of beers, which probably means 6. And then he said, Fred went to the fridge, and he saw this mound of pate in the fridge, and he thought this was great. And he pulled it out, and he gobbled it up. And the next morning, the Cormans came down for breakfast, and they said, "Where's the cat food?"
That's funny.
Fred had eaten the cat food.
Unlike yourself and Tina, I don't know Roy Emerson, but I spent a lot of time around Roy Emerson. He was in Southern Cal. He was at the John Wayne Tennis Club. And initially, I was just observing. I was the volunteer. So if Vic was out of town, I was out of town. I was driving all over Southern Cal. Eventually, they said,
"Nice,
you have to go to work." And so then I didn't have as much freedom, because they actually offered me a job, and I said, I'll turn it down. I was working nights, but I was hanging out with Vic. I was Vic's gopher, go for this, go for that. So Kim Wittenberg was on our podcast, and he was the assistant pro at the John Wayne Tennis Club. And we were on a first-name basis with Roy. He was giving lessons to Armitage, Vijay Armitage, Ilie Nastase, and Billie Jean King. Billie Jean King was number 1 in the world. This was in the 70s. And so Billie, she's in a bad mood. She starts yelling at us. We're just sitting there. We've already hit some balls for a couple hours. Okay, let's just watch Roy teach tennis. And we're, we're off to the side, and certainly we were taking away privacy, and Billy starts yelling at us. What are you guys doing here? And so Roy Emerson, this is amazing. He said, Billy, you have to go apologize to Steve and Kim, or this lesson's over. And Billie Jean King, it was really kind of awkward. She comes out and goes, I'm sorry, guys, I'm in a really bad mood. And it was just amazing, old school tennis. But his son, Anthony, I believe he played at USC, and he died at a really young age.
He did. We went to the funeral. It was very sad. And we had gone to Gestad, where Roy runs his program for the last 40 years, and Tina and I were privileged to be there with Anthony. Lovely, lovely human being. Very sad funeral where everybody spoke, and he didn't realize what he had done. But yeah, he played at USC. Huh?
Yeah.
He could definitely chirp, meaning that Roy Emerson could trash talk, so he could get the guys going. And it was Ross Case and Jeff Masters had just won Wimbledon.
Yes.
And it was only one set. So they show up, and I sat right there and watched it. It was Roy Emerson and his son Anthony. They play one set with the Wimbledon champions, and they win.
Took them apart, I'll bet. Yep.
I mean, I'd go on and on. I'm going to sign off. But I saw Roy in the back of the Boca Hotel. Gerolitis, I mean, he had practiced all day. I mean, he used to party around the clock, but I was there watching. He practiced all day. He was a top seed in one of the old Bill Reardon tournaments, and he got knocked out. Jimmy Connors had his own circuit, really. And, there was guys like Metrovelli and Nastasi. So, I know Gerolitis had practiced all day, but I watched one set. I was the only person watching. It was at the back of the Boca Hotel, and Roy Emerson. There's a guy who played in a Wimbledon final and he never went to bed. They were getting like a gift certificate worth 27 pounds or something. Where he
awful, absolutely. I know.
Played the piano and drank beer and sang songs and rocked up the next day and played Wimbledon while going to bed.
They're all part of this fantasy week that Nuke runs, and I stopped in there also. I was in San Antonio, and there's some players, by the way, there's some of those older fellas who've been going for 30 years to the fantasy week. And I don't think it's got anything to do with tennis. It's the stories, it's the drinking, it's the camaraderie. They put them in teams. It's the abuse that they get from the Emersons and the Stollies and all. So it's quite interesting. God, Steve, we're like two old people, and we're not. So the way we've talked, I mean, it's been fantastic. Thank you for the.
One last thing on those Aussies, though. The story goes, is that Roy Emerson he's a guy who could confirm the story, like Fred Stolle. I'm just one who's been told or read that Hopman have those guys practice twice, and whoever he thought worked the hardest, he would ask to go have a couple beers with him. So Hopman and say Laver, whoever he chose. Then everybody else had to go run 10 miles. I mean, those guys work so hard. I think today the players, they're fitter because of the knowledge with weight training and nutrition, but they're not tougher. Not even close.
No question. We saw it in our camp. We used to make them run around the track at Haverford until probably 15, 20 years ago. And if we would have made them run around the track at Haverford as of late, they would have given up tennis. So sort of no pain, no gain. It's gone.
Well, early on, you had a coach. I believe he was South African. I believe his first name was David. And
David Saul, absolutely.
Yeah, he was tough.
Abusive.
He was tough. He would get those guys doing push-ups and sit-ups on the hard courts.
He was motivating.
He was motivating. Yeah, I can't say abusive, but he got away. I mean, we used to have the marathon, and they would play for 5-6 hours without stopping, and it molded the characters. There's a guy in Chicago who says that marathon made me. The ability to keep going when there was nothing left. It's sad.
No, I'll leave you this. Yeah. In the 70s, like American football players, and we would do this, didn't matter, boys or girls, what age, is we'd get on a field and you would just yell, hit it, and they had to throw themselves on the ground. I mean, those type of things are just gone now, and
very sad. Again, anyhow, listen, we should enjoy every bit of where we're at now. I mean, you can't look back. I think we all have a fabulous life, notwithstanding, and just be happy and healthy.
And life evolves.
Yeah.
And stay interesting and interested.
Oh, that's well said. But no, thank you for your time, Tina, Julian.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me be part of your program all those years. It was.
It's been an honor. Thank you. And thanks, Ivan, Ivan. We appreciate your work.
Yeah, Ivan, he's our man putting this together. But yeah, I'll let him know.
Thank
He's
you.
right here. Yeah, good night. Thanks again. And our listeners will love this. A lot of pearls.
I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah.
We're all the same. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah,
appreciate
again,
everything.
That was super. Thanks.
Yeah,
Good
be
night.
healthy.
Adios.
Bye-bye.
Yep, bye.
Thanks.
All right, podcast 122. I have to sign off because I think we have gone to the time period where this is good for an international flight. But seriously, if you can take 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, I do think that there's some things that were shared that will help the growth and welfare of tennis. The three things, I think, education. And I think there's one theme to pull from the conversation I had with Julian and Tina would be history. Reflective thought. Take a time out and think about what happened. Anyway, thank you very much, listeners. GreatBase Tennis Podcast, another one in the books.